The late afternoon sun, which had broiled the Zambezi Valley for hours, suddenly gave way to a furious, churning sky. A suffocating humidity hung in the air. Then, without warning, the heavens ripped open. Rain lashed down in thick, stinging sheets, and the mighty Zambezi River, already swollen from distant rains, began to roar its protest, its surface boiling with furious whitecaps. Ranger Kaelo, hunched against the torrent in his patrol vehicle, squinted through the streaming windshield. His practiced eyes scanned the familiar landscape, a routine he knew in his bones. That's when he saw him, a flash of tawny gold in the churning brown, fighting a losing battle against the relentless current. It was Njovu, the youngest male of the Mwamba Pride, a lion Kaelo had watched grow from a gangly cub. But Njovu wasn't just struggling, he was trapped. A complex, almost alien-looking netting ensnared his powerful form, binding his legs and torso, pulling him deeper into the swirling depths. It was nothing like the crude, desperate snares of local poachers. This was something else entirely, woven from an unfamiliar, incredibly durable material that shimmered unnaturally even under the storm-darkened sky. A cold dread seized Kaelo, overriding the immediate shock. Every protocol, every ounce of his extensive training screamed at him, "Do not interfere. This is the wild. Your life is not worth an animal's." But staring into Njovu's desperate, drowning eyes, Kaelo felt a deeper, older instinct ignite within him, a fierce, unyielding compassion that tore through the strictures of duty. The roar of the river faded, replaced by the deafening conflict in his own mind. His career, his very life, would be forfeit if he failed, if he was even seen. Yet he couldn't turn away. "I can't just watch him drown," Kaelo muttered, the words barely audible over the storm's fury, as he scrambled for his compact inflatable boat. His hands moved with a practiced urgency, launching the small craft into the tempestuous river. The Zambezi fought him, throwing waves that threatened to capsize him. But Kaelo dug deep, paddling with a desperate strength, his eyes never leaving Njovu. He reached the struggling lion. Astonishingly, Njovu had stopped thrashing. His golden eyes, wide with a primal fear, were locked onto Kaelo's, unwavering as if he understood. A silent, unsettling plea. As Kaelo wrestled with the unfamiliar net, his fingers brushing against its tightly woven strands, he noticed something impossible. Faint, almost imperceptible filaments within the material glowed with a soft, ethereal light, even through the murk and the driving rain. This wasn't just sophisticated, it was advanced, beyond anything any local poacher or even international syndicates he knew of could deploy. This was manufactured, precise, and utterly terrifying. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, the last strand snapped. Njovu, free, thrashed once more before finding his footing in the shallower water near the bank. He stumbled ashore, soaked and shivering, but alive. Kaelo, exhausted, watched him. Then, in an unprecedented gesture that sent a shiver down Kaelo's spine, Njovu turned back, his golden eyes meeting Kaelo's once more, before lowering his massive head slightly, a silent, profound acknowledgement. From the opposite bank, through the blurring rain, Kaelo saw them. The rest of the Mwamba Pride, led by the matriarch Mwenzi, had gathered. Their gazes, intense and unblinking, were fixed not on Njovu, but on the human who had defied all natural order. Their collective stare felt like a heavy cloak, a silent judgment, or perhaps something more. For the sound of Jabu's approaching vehicle became too loud, Kaelo swiftly, discreetly, pocketed a small, still glowing piece of the peculiar net. It felt cold and smooth, an impossible fragment of a burgeoning nightmare. Jabu's truck skidded into a halt, spraying mud. He lapped out, eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "You're insane, Kaelo. You should be dead," Jabu exclaimed, shaking his head, scanning the churning river. Then Kaelo's drenched form. Kaelo just offered a faint, tired smile, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "So should he, Jabu." He clenched his hand around the strange net fragment hidden in his pocket, a chilling discovery that whispered of a larger, darker truth, one he was now inextricably bound to unravel. The air in the headquarters office felt thicker than the midday humidity. Kaelo stood rigidly, absorbing the clipped, indignant reprimands from his superiors. He offered vague explanations, citing the urgency of the situation, the sudden ferocity of the storm, anything to obscure the impossible truth. He painted himself as reckless, impulsive, a rogue ranger driven by a momentary lapse in judgment, anything but a man who had witnessed a lion look him in the eyes with profound understanding. He omitted the luminous net, the silent, intense gazes of the Mwamba Pride, and the impossible weight of Ninjovu's final, acknowledging bow. Those details, he knew, would brand him a madman. Some truths are too fragile for ink and paper, he mused to himself later, staring out at the darkening savannah, the official warning in his file feeling like a badge of dishonor, yet also a shield. Days bled into a week. The official reprimand was a small price for the churning unease that gnawed at him. He felt an inexplicable pull back to the riverbank, to the stretch of water where he had risked everything. He found himself there late one afternoon, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows. And then they appeared. Not a sudden panicked flight, but a deliberate procession. The entire Mwamba Pride emerged from the dense riverine thicket, moving with an eerie, synchronized grace. Njovu, his golden mane now fully dry and gleaming, led them. Kaelo froze, his hand instinctively going for the rifle slung over his shoulder, but he didn't raise it. Njovu stopped just meters from the water's edge, his powerful form silhouetted against the amber light. He dipped his head, a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. And then, the unbelievable happened. One by one, each lion in the pride mirrored Njovu's action. Mwenzi, the stoic matriarch, followed by the others, their heads lowering in a solemn, silent ceremony of profound gratitude. It wasn't a show of submission, but something far more potent, a communion that transcended the chasm between species. Kaelo felt it deep within his bones, an unspoken vow, a bond that defied every scientific explanation he knew. The small, still glowing piece of the net felt like a hot coal in his pocket. This was not a local poacher's work. This was something else. He knew a man who could tell him. A retired research biologist, Professor Anya Sharma, whose clandestine lab, filled with humming machines and the smell of ozone, was a sanctuary for secrets too dangerous for the official channels. He met Anya under the cover of dusk, the handoff quick and tense. Days later, her call came, her voice hushed, tinged with a tremor Kaelo hadn't heard before. Kaelo, this isn't just a net. It's an advanced tracking device. Her words were a whisper, thick with concern. Her initial analysis had revealed synthetic polymers, yes, but interwoven with them were incredibly sophisticated, bioengineered tracing agents. Not the kind of stuff you'd find in any typical poaching trap. This was state-of-the-art, covert, almost futuristic. Then came the bombshell. The biomarkers in these agents, Kaelo, they're tied to a classified corporate patent. A big pharmaceutical and agri-tech conglomerate, I can't name them. Their research is ethically dubious. Wildlife manipulation, genetic targeting. This isn't just tracking, Kaelo. It's invasive. What they're doing, it crosses every line. The pieces began to click into place horrifyingly. This wasn't random poaching. This was targeted surveillance, perhaps even a prelude to something far more sinister involving the Mwamba Pride. A chill spread through Kaelo, colder than any Zambezi night. He started noticing it then, on his patrols. The unusual awareness the Mwamba Pride showed of his presence. They wouldn't flee, wouldn't even appear startled. Sometimes they almost seemed to seek him out, their golden eyes following his movements from a distance, a silent, knowing vigil. One evening, under a vast canopy of stars, a deep, resonant roar echoed across the savannah. It wasn't a challenge or a territorial claim. It was a communication, a profound call that settled in Kaelo's chest, a feeling that it was meant for him and him alone. "They're trying to tell me something," Kaelo said aloud, the words escaping him without thought, as he gazed at the luminous constellations. His agonizing decision to save Njovu had done more than just save a lion's life. It had pulled him, irrevocably, into a growing conspiracy, one that now put him at unimaginably high personal risk, with stakes far beyond anything he had ever known. The savannah was Kaelo's second skin, its rhythms ingrained in his very being. But now those rhythms felt subtly off-kilter, skewed by an unseen hand. He noticed it in Njovu and in Mwenzi especially, an intelligent, almost strategic precision in their movements during his patrols. The entire Mwamba Pride, usually a fluid, somewhat independent unit, now seemed to patrol their territory with an unusual cohesion, often near areas Kaelo had recently visited. It was as if they were performing a coordinated dance, a subtle yet unmistakable shift in their ingrained wild behavior. One stormy evening, as a thick, bruised sky rumbled overhead, Kaelo felt an insistent pull towards the sandbar where he'd rescued Niovu. It wasn't just a feeling, it was almost a low growl, a resonant summons that seemed to vibrate through the damp earth beneath his boots. He followed it, his senses heightened by the oppressive atmosphere, the hair on his arms prickling. Near the water's edge, half buried in the churned sand, he found them. Tiny, almost imperceptibly camouflaged ground sensors, no bigger than pebbles, embedded along the riverbank. And nearby, tucked into a clump of reeds, was the mangled remains of a small, high-altitude drone, its advanced composite frame splintered. Kaelo's breath hitched. This was beyond anything he had imagined. "This is no accident," he whispered, the realization a cold, hard knot in his stomach. "They're watching them, and me." He carefully examined the advanced tech, his ranger's eye for detail cataloging every anomaly. The drone's shattered casing, the minute sensors, they all bore the same telltale components, the same unsettling biosignatures Anya had identified in the net fragment. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a sophisticated, highly funded operation. The pieces clicked with brutal clarity. The Pride's unusual presence around him, their silent vigilance, wasn't just gratitude. It was a form of warning, a plea for protection. They knew they were being watched, and they had recognized Kaelo as an unlikely, yet undeniable ally. The subtle shifts in the savannah weren't just in the animals. He began to overhear hushed, uneasy conversations among other rangers back at base camp. Whispers of unmarked vehicles seen deep in restricted zones, strange lights in the sky at night, disappearing without a trace. Anomalies that were dismissed as overactive imaginations or local superstitions, but to Kaelo, they were all threads in the same chilling tapestry. His scrambled phone line crackled, Anya's voice urgent and low. "Someone wants this pride, Kaelo," she said, the usual scientific detachment gone from her tone. "And they're very powerful. The corporate entity tied to those patents. They have deep pockets and even deeper connections." Kaelo felt the insidious weight of the conspiracy settle heavily upon him. The personal risk, once a theoretical concept, now felt acutely real, growing with each discovery. He started documenting every anomaly, every sighting, every scrap of evidence, meticulously cataloging dates, timelines, and locations. This wasn't just about saving animals anymore. It was about exposing a dangerous truth, one that could shatter the fragile peace of the wilderness and endanger everything he held dear. In a moment of vulnerability, seeking a grounding force, he shared a fragmented detail with Jabu, carefully omitting the more fantastical elements. Jabu merely stared at him, then shook his head, a mixture of concern and exasperation on his face. "Stick to protocol, Kaelo, before you get yourself fired. Or worse." The implication hung heavy in the air. The warning only solidified Kaelo's resolve. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he couldn't back down. He had to push deeper, knowing his actions could lead to a deadly confrontation, not just for him, but for the Pride. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Kaelo saw him, Njovu, a silhouette against the fading light, watching him from the tall grass, a silent, knowing presence. The lion's golden eyes, luminous in the twilight, mirrored Kaelo's own burden, a shared understanding that transcended words. The hunter and the Prahantar Ataduma, now bound by a conspiracy that threatened to consume them both. The dry season had been unforgiving, the savannah brittle and primed for disaster. It came in the form of a massive wildfire, igniting on the northern plains and sweeping southward with terrifying speed. Within hours, it transformed into an inferno, a roaring wall of flame and smoke that drove all wildlife into a panicked, chaotic flight. Kaelo joined the frantic firefighting teams, battling the blaze, But his focus, an almost obsessive drive, was on the Mwamba territory. Through the suffocating haze, his heart pounding against his ribs, Kaelo followed the desperate trails of singed gum and hurried paw prints. His worst fears were confirmed. The Mwamba Pride was trapped. The advancing flames formed an insurmountable barrier behind them, and ahead lay a wide, steep ravine, its sheer drops a natural prison, a cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline. His unit was fighting in a different flank, but Kaelo knew with an undeniable certainty that his duty lay elsewhere. He abandoned his team, disregarding direct orders that screamed in his mind like the wind-whipped flames. His own life, his career, everything seemed insignificant against the bond forged with Jovu. "They're counting on me," he gasped, choking on smoke and ash, a fierce, primal conviction overriding all rationale. He broke through a curtain of smoldering bush, finding them. Through the hazy, orange-tinged air, Kaelo saw Jovu, resolute and unyielding, leading Mwenzi and the lionesses. They were in a tight, organized formation, the cubs shielded in their midst, their eyes wide with terror but their movements surprisingly disciplined. Kaelo began to shout, his voice raw, waving his arms frantically, directing them to a narrow, unburned pass between a cluster of ancient rocks, a barely perceptible escape route he knew from countless patrols. And then the phenomenon. The Nyovu's golden eyes met his through the smoke, and without hesitation, the young male instantly understood. He turned, his powerful frame cutting through the Kes, leading the Pride with extraordinary precision, guiding the smaller, terrified cubs through the treacherous terrain. Mwenzi, ever vigilant, brought up the rear, her growls low and insistent, ensuring no one was left behind. Amidst the swirling smoke and the terrifying crackle of flames, Kaelo caught glimpses of movement on a distant ridge. Not fleeing animals, but unmarked SUVs, sleek and dark, parked discreetly. Figures moved around them, holding what looked like specialized cameras and thermal imaging devices. They were observing, not helping. They watched the Pride's desperate escape, silent and detached, like scientists studying an experiment. The realization hit Kaelo with the force of a physical blow, stripping the air from his lungs. This fire was no accident. It couldn't be. It was a calculated event, a deliberate act, a test, perhaps, to observe the Pride's unique intelligence, their extraordinary cohesion, their very anomalous behavior under unimaginable stress. Or perhaps it was a cruel method to flush them out, to track their movements, to push them to their limits. The horror of it made his gorge rise. After what felt like an eternity, the Pride reached the safety of the ravine's opposite bank, scrambling up the less steep side and disappearing into the charred, smoldering landscape beyond the immediate danger. Njovu, singed but unbowed, turned back. Across the smoke-filled chasm, his gaze met Kaelo's, and he delivered an even deeper, more solemn bow than before, a silent acknowledgement that sent a fresh wave of despair and dread through Kaelo. He collapsed then, the adrenaline draining from him, leaving him trembling and gasping for breath, overwhelmed by the full, horrifying extent of the human hunt. As he slowly regained his composure, his eyes scanned the ground near where the observers had been. There, half buried in the ash, he found it, a discarded high-tech thermal imaging drone, its intricate sensors proof of deliberate, clinical surveillance throughout the inferno. "They're not just studying them," Kaelo whispered to himself, his voice hoarse, the words heavy with a dawning terror. "They're playing gun." The implications were monstrous, chilling him to the core. If you've been on the edge of your seat so far, you won't believe what happens next. The stakes have just exploded, shifting from a quiet conspiracy to an open confrontation, putting not just the lions, but entire communities in immediate, life-threatening danger. So hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single crucial detail of this unfolding nightmare. Weeks crawled by, the Savannah slowly stitching itself back together, green shoots pushing through the charred earth. Kaelo, outwardly, was a local hero, hailed for his reckless bravery in the fire. But beneath the surface, he was a man struggling, haunted by the truth of what he had witnessed, a secret that pressed down on him with crushing weight. He continued his patrols, eyes constantly scanning, not just for poachers or wildfires, but for the invisible threads of a conspiracy he knew was tightening its grip. Then the call came, a ranger's voice crackling with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Kaelo, it's, it's the Mwamba Pride. They've gathered openly, near the northern village, just sitting there, behaving strangely. Kaelo's heart hammered. This was unprecedented. Lions approaching a human settlement, not in a desperate hunt, but in a deliberate, calm assembly. He raced there, the familiar dirt track blurring beneath his tires, a knot of apprehension and profound curiosity tightening in his gut. He arrived to find a scene that defied all logic and expectation. The entire Mwamba Pride, led by Njovu, was arrayed calmly on the edge of the village, in plain sight of the stunned, terrified, and awestruck villagers. A gasp rippled through the gathered onlookers as Njovu, with a measured grace that belied his immense power, advanced slowly, his golden eyes, luminous and intelligent, fixed on Kaelo. Then he lowered his massive head in a profound bow, a gesture of reverence that resonated deep in Kaelo's soul. Mwenzi followed, her strong form dipping in unison. One by one, every lion in the pride bowed, a silent, solemn ceremony performed openly before a multitude of human witnesses. Kaelo felt a tremor run through him, a mixture of awe and profound, desperate understanding. His hand, shaking slightly, rose to return the gesture, bowing deeply to the pride. This wasn't just a sign of gratitude. It was a public act of trust, a desperate, undeniable plea for help, etched into the very fabric of their unnatural communication. As the pride slowly, peacefully, retreated into the bush, leaving behind a silence thick with wonder and confusion, Kaelo moved among the villagers. Their relief was palpable, but beneath it lay a deeper current of fear and anger. He listened, and the threads of the conspiracy began to intertwine with their plight. Their water sources, they recounted, had been mysteriously contaminated, causing illness and crop failures. Their traditional land claims, vital for their survival, were being aggressively challenged by a powerful, shadowy corporation that seemed to appear from nowhere, pushing for new drilling and mining rights. Driven by a terrible premonition, Kaelo collected water samples from the contaminated wells. He didn't need Anya this time. The visual anomalies, the acrid scent, and a rudimentary field test pointed to a grim conclusion. The familiar biomarkers from the original net and drone were present in the water, undeniable evidence linking the corporate entity not only to the surveillance of the lions, but to the systematic environmental damage afflicting the local community. The digital chime of his ranger terminal startled him later that night. A cryptic, anonymous message glowed on the screen, stark and chilling. "Stay out of matters you don't understand, Ranger. This is bigger than you." It was a direct threat, a confirmation that he was now squarely in their crosshairs. Kaelo finally grasped the full, horrifying scope of the conspiracy. The fate of the Mwamba Pride and the local communities were inextricably intertwined, both victims of the same shadowy corporate entity, an unseen hand manipulating lives and landscapes for its own insidious gain. The conflict that had simmered within him since Njovu's rescue now ignited into an unshakable resolve. He could no longer stay silent. The personal risk was immense, a potential death sentence. But the moral imperative, the undeniable call of justice for both man and beast, was infinitely stronger. He began secretly collecting more samples, meticulously documenting corporate activities, every unexplained spill, every coerced land deal. Jabu, though still skeptical of Kaelo's wilder claims, noticed the deep determination in his friend's eyes, the quiet, dangerous shift in his demeanor. He saw a man who had chosen his path, come what may. On the edge of the grasslands, Njovu watched Kaelo, a silent, knowing presence. The lion's unwavering resolve mirrored Kaelo's own, a shared burden, a shared fight. The silent reverence of the pride, once a mysterious phenomenon, had become a rallying cry, and Kaelo, the Lone Ranger, was now their chosen champion. Kaelo worked tirelessly, fueled by a simmering rage and an unshakable sense of purpose. With Jabu's reluctant but ultimately loyal assistance, he meticulously compiled every piece of evidence: the glowing net fragments, the advanced drone components, the contaminated water samples, and Anya's damning corporate patent documents. Official channels were no longer an option. The silence and dismissal he'd faced confirmed they were either compromised or too afraid to touch this. His only recourse was a trusted, independent journalist known for their relentless pursuit of truth. The final horrifying truth unspooled as Kaelo cross-referenced the data. The corporation behind it all, Genesis Biosolutions, wasn't just a pharmaceutical and agri-tech giant. It was a front for illegal genetic research. Their target wasn't random. It was specific. The Mwamba Pride and Yovuo in particular. Their unprecedented intelligence and adaptability, the unusual cohesion, the almost human-like communication. These weren't just anomalies. They were being studied, their genetic code potentially harvested for bioenhancement or, terrifyingly, even weaponization. The snares weren't just traps. They were sophisticated tracking and sampling devices designed to extract biological data without lethal harm. The drones were for granular behavioral observation. And the wildfire? That wasn't an accident. It was a stress test, meticulously designed to provoke and record their unique, coordinated survival instincts under extreme duress. Kaelo felt a cold, deep despair. He finally understood the Mwamba Pride's gratitude, their reverence. It wasn't just a thank you. It was a desperate plea for protection, a cry for help from a species aware of a profound existential threat. They weren't just bowing Jabu, Kaelo explained, his voice tight with raw emotion, the truth a heavy weight on his soul. They were reaching out. They knew. The plan was simple. Transmit the compiled evidence to the journalist, then disappear. But Genesis Biosolutions was everywhere. As Kaelo set up his makeshift transmission hub in a secluded rocky outcrop, the guttural roar of approaching engines shattered the twilight peace. Heavily armed security forces, clad in corporate fatigues, swarmed the area. A direct confrontation was inevitable. Under a hail of gunfire, Kaelo faced an agonizing gauntlet of decisions. He had to secure the data, protect Jabu, who was valiantly creating a diversion, and expose the truth, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Explosions rocked the ground as Jabu's old Land Cruiser detonated, drawing fire. Kaelo, bleeding from a graze to his arm, worked furiously, the satellite uplink blinking. With a final desperate burst of energy, he hit send. The data, the irrefutable evidence, was out. Just as the transmission completed, a chorus of powerful, defiant roars erupted from the surrounding savannah. The Mwamba Pride, unseen but ever present, responded, their collective voice echoing through the night, a final thunderous stand against the encroaching human darkness. It was a roar of solidarity, of defiance, a promise. Kaelo, injured but resolute, scrambled away, melting into the shadows. He watched from a hidden vantage point as Genesis Biosolutions forces converged. Too late. The Mwamba Pride's farewell, the majestic, defiant roars, were not an end but a call to arms. His life was irrevocably tied to theirs, and he knew it then with a clarity that sharpened his resolve. He was no longer just a ranger, bound by the fragile protocols of man. He was their protector, now waging an unseen war against a powerful, insidious enemy for the very soul of the wild. He would fight for Njavu, for Mwenzi, for the silenced voices of the savannah, until his last breath. The savannah, once a familiar sanctuary, had transformed into a battleground, its silent whispers now carrying the weight of a corporate shadow. Kaelo, once a ranger bound by human law, had transcended his duty, becoming an unlikely champion in a war waged not with bullets, but with bioengineered secrets and ruthless ambition. The Mwamba Pride, with Njovu at its heart, were more than just animals. They were sentient beings, aware and desperate, their silent pleas echoing the silent threat. Kaelo's journey from a forbidden rescue to an all-out confrontation had unveiled a chilling reality. Humanity's reach had extended beyond exploitation into manipulation and weaponization of life itself. The bond he shared with the Pride was now an unbreakable pact, a testament to a truth far grander and more terrifying than anyone could imagine. The fight for the soul of the wild had just begun, and Kaelo, scarred but resolute, would stand as their shield, their voice, their guardian against the unseen enemy.